Absolute Wonder Woman is the last Amazon. Welcome to the Comicstorian Full Story channel, where we take old and new full stories from Comicstorian and put them here to give you a better viewing experience. Today, we see Diana of the Absolute Universe. This is not the Diana you're used to, as this one is the last Amazon, the Princess of Hell, and the daughter of Circe. You'll find out today with issues 1 through 5 of Absolute Wonder Woman by Kelly Thompson. I hope you enjoy. Gateway City. The strange structure suddenly appeared over the beach, interrupting the sunny day and startling the beachgoers for miles. News cameras quickly began to cover the phenomenon as the upside-down pyramid simply hovered over the ocean. But suddenly, screeches could be heard. Small red creatures, lizards with wings, suddenly flew from the pyramid's crevices. The monsters swooped down on the population of Gateway City, causing the people to run in fear. Windows shattered and people ran in a bloody panic. One person falls, trying to cover their head as the monsters swoop on them. But suddenly, there is a crack of lightning across the blood-red sky, and the creatures scatter as a rider descends on a flying skeletal horse. The rider draws a massive sword and slices through the monsters. She leaps from her mount, landing in a heroic pose on the beach. Flayed monsters fall around her as she removes her helmet and reaches down to dip her fingers in their blood, smearing it across her face. She raises her hand, and an ancient spell escapes from her lips. The spell lashes out, stunning the monsters and dropping them to the ground. And through it all, a smile plays across her beautiful face. Long ago, on the wild Isle of Hell, the witch Circe continues her endless toil in the darkness. But suddenly, there is a sunshine upon her back. "Never thought I'd be happy to see the sun," she says with a sigh as she stands and turns. Apollo, god of the sun, slowly descends upon her. "Come forward, witch. You may kneel," he tells her. Circe frowns and shields her eyes. "I'm fine," she says with a shake of her head. He holds out a bundle in his hands, offering it to her. Circe looks at it in surprise and takes the baby girl. "This is a baby. Why have you brought a baby to hell?" she asks. Apollo has already begun to float away, the sun rising over the island. "The baby is Diana, princess of Themyscira. She is the last of the Amazons and has been taken from them by my father, Zeus, as punishment for their crimes against the gods," Apollo declares. He tells Circe that Diana may never again see her people and they have all been imprisoned. Apollo suddenly stops his ascent. "From here forth, the word Amazon is banned. So I decree," he bellows, his words springing forth like rays of the sun. He looks down at the witch and smiles. "Try it for me, Circe. Try to say the word. I want to see," he asks. Circe looks at the baby in her arms and whispers the word. But it comes out soundless, like it had never existed in the first place. Satisfied with his work, Apollo turns and continues his ascent, with Circe holding the baby in her arms. "This is hell. What if it dies?" she calls. Apollo doesn't bother to look over his shoulder. "The gods care not. This is where she belongs now, for however long she is," he calls before disappearing, casting the isle once more into twilight. Circe sighs and places the child on the rocks. Diana gurgles as Circe sits quietly and studies her. Suddenly, a glowing snake begins to make its way towards the child. Circe doesn't move, unsurprised that hell would take the child so quickly. The snake opens its mouth wide and prepares to strike, but the child is fast. and Diana reaches out and snaps the snake's mouth close. And she giggles as she flings it away. Cersei stares in surprise for a moment before smiling at the baby. And so, their lives continue in hell. At first, Cersei regards the child with little interest, helping her, but not caring for her. But time continues on, and the powerful sorceress begins to raise Diana, taking care of her, teaching her, growing to love her as her own. In this way, the two make a meager life on the Isle of Hell. The years pass, and both Diana and Cersei grow older, until the day finally comes. The present. The warrior Diana turns away from the pyramid. The beach is littered with the stunned bodies of the demon lizards. She stalks towards the National Guardsman. "Are you in charge here, soldier?" she asks. But the young man can do little more than stare at her with a gaping mouth and stumbling over his words. "You should evacuate all civilians within a mile," she tells him. She motions to the lizards on the beach. "They are but harbingers for what is to come," she warns him. Suddenly, the pyramid begins to shake and open from the bottom. Diana sighs and looks back. "We are out of time. Evacuate your civilians and bring your army," she says. She turns back as the pyramid seemingly uncurls and gives birth to a massive demon creature. The monster falls into the ocean and stalks towards the city. But Diana stands in its path, her blade at the ready. She glares up at the monster. "You are not welcome, Harbinger Prime. This world will defend itself. I stand before you with the mythical Athena blade, forged by Hephaestus himself. It is more than capable of sending you to your maker. This world is protected," Diana declares. The creature regards her for a moment before opening its mouth. Its words are like thunder, pushing Diana back. "But it is not," the beast declares. Suddenly, Diana's skeletal Pegasus swoops down, breathing fire on the monster. The monster turns from Diana, swatting away the pest. The warrior uses this moment to attack, but the monster turns back to her, beams of energy leaping from its eyes and bringing Diana to her knees. "Ugh, damn laser eyes, every time," she groans as she struggles to her feet. The beast stands tall, letting out a bellow for the smaller creatures to rise. The demon lizards awaken and attack once more, their wings and beaks slashing at Diana's skin. "Again you stand? We warned you!" the beast hisses. It fires again, the blast taking Diana off her feet and sending her bouncing along the beach. A short time ago, Diana sits with Cersei in their cave on the Isle of Hell. Sitting before the fire, the two sit in their chairs. Finally, Diana works up the courage to speak. "Mother, I want to ask you about this word," Diana says, motioning to her book. Cersei nods and smiles, closing her own tome. "I thought you might," she says softly. "It's important." "I'm afraid," Diana whispers. But Cersei shakes her head. She knows that her daughter fears little. "You're not afraid of the word. You're afraid of the change saying it will bring," Cersei says. She reaches a hand for Diana's cheek. "Say the word, Diana. Say it and know it is what you are," Cersei tells her. Diana pauses for a moment and nods. "Amazon," she whispers. And so, Cersei tells her daughter the truth. She tells her of the day that Apollo brought her to this damned island that became their home, brought Diana into her life, and how Cersei grew to love her, and that the god banned her from ever saying the word. "They don't want me to know I'm an Amazon. They took me from them, and they tried to stop me from knowing what I was. Why?" Diana questions. Cersei stands and takes Diana in her arms, explaining that the Amazons protected the world from darkness, and without them, the very world may end. Or perhaps you will say your name again and become what you were always meant to be, Cersei whispers. Tears begin to fall from Diana's eyes. Amazon! Diana calls. Now, on the beach, the warrior struggles to her feet, a look of determination on her face as she stares up at the massive monster that threatens the city. No, Diana whispers. She reaches into her pouch, pulling forth a lasso of magical power, its red fibers whirling around her as she stalks forward. The monster looks down at her once more. Away, warrior! You are beaten! Leave us, as we must prepare the way. This world is ours now, the monster says, motioning her away. But Diana shakes her head. No, she growls as she begins to float into the air, her eyes glowing as they cast the reflection of her weapon. For I am Diana of Themyscira, last of the Amazons, daughter of Cersei, princess of Hell, witch of the Wild Isle, and you will not have this world while I still draw breath. Gateway City. The massive creature known as the Harbinger from the depths of the ocean steps forward, but is met by Diana, who stalks up the Gateway City beach with her magic lasso whipping around her body. The Harbinger fires a blast of energy from its great eyes, which Diana dodges under. She lashes out with her lasso, striking the monster across the face. That is but a taste, Harbinger Prime. Retreat now and save yourself, she orders. But the monster bellows for its minions, and the small lizard-like creatures launch forward, swarming over Diana. Retreat is doom, you fool, the Harbinger rumbles. Diana throws up a protective spell and knocks away the small creatures with her lasso. The Harbinger has left her no choice, and she whirls the weapon over her head and tosses it around the great beast's neck. Hear me, Harbinger Prime. This is a weapon forged in the fires of hell, fashioned by the sorceress Cersei and made from the remains of the last basilisk. It binds and burns in proportion to your sins, Diana tells the monster. Harbinger Prime roars with pain as its skin begins to sizzle. Release me, Amazon! Release me! The Harbinger Prime yells, his screams of pain shaking the buildings around them. Diana nods her head. You shall have your freedom on one condition only, Harbinger Prime, she tells the monster, ordering the creature to return to the depths from whence it came and tell its master that the earth is now under the protection of Diana of the Wild Isle, princess of Hell, and the last Amazon. The Harbinger stares at her for a moment before finally dipping its head in submission. We accept, it rumbles. Diana nods and releases the creature, allowing it to return to the ocean, its small minions following close behind. Diana lowers to the ground, watching as the ocean returns to its former calm. Behind her, the smoke of the battle billows, and as the smoke begins to blow in the ocean breeze, a lone soldier steps through. Diana? He asks. The princess turns slowly and regards her lost friend. Steve, she says gently. Before, on the shores of the Wild Isle, Diana was walking one day and discovered a man washed up on the shore. Rushing to his side, she leaned over his battered body. Please tell them I'm sorry, Steve gasps. His eyes flutter for a moment and close. Who are you? Where did you come from? Diana wonders quietly to herself. Lifting the man in her arms, she rushes back to their home. Cersei turns in shock as the door bursts open and Diana rushes inside. the man in her arms. "Mother, bring the Cerberus fur! It's the warmest!" Diana shouts as she lays Steve in her bed. She quickly tells her mother the story of finding the man on the beach, and even Cersei is shocked by the tale. Finally, she sighs and turns to their kitchen. "I'll put the kettle on," she mutters. Later, Steve awakens to find Diana sitting with him. She offers him a warm cup of tea, explaining where she found him. "So, where are we?" Steve finally asks. Diana looks away sheepishly. "Well, this is going to be hard. You're in the underworld," she tells him. Steve springs out of the bed in shock. "Wait, hell? I'm dead?" he shouts. The two women shrug. "Not exactly," they say. Steve sits back on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, muttering to himself. I'll just give you a minute with that," Diana says softly. Later, Steve joins the two for dinner, apologizing to them for his outburst. Cersei introduces herself with a shake of his hand. "Fortunately for you, you landed on the Wild Isle, which, thanks to Diana and myself, is the safest place to be, if you have to be in hell," she explains. Steve nods, his mind still reeling, but he turns to Diana and asks her to show him where he washed up on the shore. As the two walk along the beach, Steve explains that he thought he had lived a good life, that he didn't believe that he would be going to hell when he died. Diana shrugs. "Here's what I think. Not everyone here belongs here. It's just sometimes where we've ended up," she tells him. The two of them stare out on the ocean for a time, until Steve finally turns back to her. "Thank you for saving me. Twice," he tells her softly. Diana smiles. "You're welcome." Gateway City, now. The two stand on the beach for a moment, regarding each other. But Diana rushes forward and hugs the man. Finally, she pulls away and smiles. "I hoped I would see you, but I never dreamt it would be today," she tells him. Steve smiles back. "What are you doing here?" he asks. Diana shrugs as Pegasus lands nearby. "Saving the day," she explains. Steve nods, telling her that the military command wants to speak to her, though she might not like their attitude. Diana nods and motions for Steve to lead the way. "You do not need to warn me, Stephen. I am not entirely naive in the world of men. I had a teacher with a sharp tongue in these things, as you well know," she tells him. But minutes later, Diana is standing tall, while a rather short general yells at her about the destruction that she caused while supposedly helping stop the monster that attacked Gateway City. When the general had stopped to take a breath, Diana finally spoke. "I understand your position, Commander. I am an outsider and an element you can't control, and that frustrates you. But this is not my problem," Diana says, explaining that her real problem is the next monster that will arrive, and that more lives will be lost if they do nothing. "But I will coordinate with you to the best of my ability. This world is not prepared for what is coming, and you will need my help," she tells him. The general is shocked as Diana turns away from him and looks at the tactical maps of the city. "How is the evacuation proceeding?" she asks a nearby officer. The tone in her voice doesn't invite questions, and the officer immediately begins to give her answers. "Slow, but we were going to stop the orders. You killed the monster, right? Or send it home?" he asks. Diana shakes her head. "I did, but that was just a harbinger, a messenger of things to come," she says, warning them that the next creature could arrive within the hour, and that they need to evacuate at least a mile away from the coastline. The general gives the order to continue the evac, but turns back to Diana and Steve and begins to shout again. Finally, Diana has had enough. She steps up and stands over the general, seeming more imposing than before, anger flashing in her eyes. "I think we both know you need me quite badly given what just happened, but I don't need you at all. So perhaps rethink how you would like to approach this conversation, and we'll retry this when you've calmed down. Hopefully before more innocent lives have been lost," she says. She turns away and storms towards the entrance to the command center. "I'll be outside, feeding my horse," she snaps over her shoulder. Steve follows her outside to find her feeding magical energy to the skeletal Pegasus. Steve steps forward and pets the undead steed, who nuzzles him with his bony muzzle. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," Steve tells her. Diana nods her head. "It's disappointing, but I expected it," she tells him. She informs Steve that other heroes will appear to fight what's coming, but Pegasus rears up and whines before she can explain more. A wave of magical energy washes over the city, and Diana turns to see the soldiers falling to the ground and clutching their heads. She moves forward, pushing through the psychic energy. She approaches the beach and stares in shock. Steve joins her, and they both stare up in horror at the great creature that has risen from the waters. "Oh my God, Diana, what is it?" he asks. "Death personified," she whispers. She begins to walk forward, ordering Steve and the others to completely evacuate the city. "I'll buy you some time, but the Tetracide leaves nothing behind," she says as she moves forward into the water, the great monster rising up before her. Far away from the shoreline, where Diana fights against the mighty demons, the staff of the Gateway City Natural History Museum watch the battle unfold on the news. But no one is staring as hard as Barbara Minerva. The hot coffee is forgotten in her hand as she recognizes the warrior woman on the TV from something in her studies. "Wonder Woman," Barbara whispers before turning and rushing out of the room, pushing past her startled coworkers in her mad dash. Meanwhile, at the boardwalk, Diana has returned to the military command center as the Tetracide continues its slow movement towards the shoreline. Diana enters the command center and leans over the table. "I used magic to slow it down. Buy us some time, but the Tetracide is very resistant to magic. My mother would have been more effective, but alas, we only have me," Diana tells them. She turns to look at the gathering of soldiers. "Before you leave, and you should all leave immediately, it's important that I tell you how the Tetracide kills, so that you may have a hope of fighting it after it has killed me," Diana tells them. The soldiers move closer, their eyes wide with fear as Diana tells them all that she knows. She explains that Tetracide literally means 4 killer, and that the great creature kills in 4 ways: death of fear, death of mind, death of body, and death of soul. "Death of fear doesn't sound so bad," one of the soldiers points out, but Diana shakes her head, explaining that the monster will emit a sound that will make it so that all who hear it will no longer be capable of feeling fear, and because of this, they will be drawn to the Tetracide. They will rush to the great monster and will walk right into its waiting jaws, where they will suffer the great agony in the death of mind, body, and soul. "I don't want to be dramatic, but the people who are crushed to death in the race to the Tetracide's maw will be the lucky ones," Diana says as she looks at those gathered. "So please, for the love of Hera, leave this place. Run if you can," she tells them. Diana pauses for a moment as they all watch her. Then, with a final nod, she walks out the door. Steve follows her quickly, but Diana begs him to try and get as many people to safety as he can. "I cannot help them once the sound begins, and it will begin very soon," she says over her shoulder as she stalks towards the beach. Pegasus waits for her. The great monster is still in the distance. Diana sighs and places a hand on the bony steed. "Pegasus, keep your distance. Attack with hellfire if you can, but stay out of reach. If it lays one tentacle on you, that's it. And I'm quite sure Zeus will make certain that you're not resurrected again, my friend," she says softly as she lays her head on his bony muzzle. Pegasus leaps into the air with a stamp of his hooves. Diana begins to fly, readying her sword and lasso. "Tetracide, I wish you no ill will. I only seek to protect these people, this city, this world. I will give you the same offer I gave the Prime Harbinger. Leave now and never return." or die by my hand, Diana calls as she floats before the monster. The Tetraside's response is a roar that echoes across the city. Diana sighs and nods her head, a steely determination in her eyes. So be it, she says softly. Diana whirls and throws the massive sword, sticking it into the Tetraside's head, the lasso wrapped around its hilt. She flies fast, racing around the monster and wrapping it up with the lasso. Goddess Nike, lend me your winged speed, if not victory, Diana prays. The Tetraside is quickly wrapped as Pegasus swoops in and fires bouts of hellfire upon it. But the plan doesn't work, and a massive tentacle reaches up and pulls the sword free, and the lasso falls uselessly with it. But Diana doesn't stop moving. She reaches inside her magic pouch as she swoops back towards the monster, a brief spell whispering from her lips as she draws forth a massive axe. Strike true, my friend, she calls to the blade as she flies among the tentacles, slashing and cleaving them from the monster. But one of the slippery appendages reaches out and wraps around her arm, pulling tight. No! Diana screams. It wasn't that long ago that Diana lived upon her island with Circe. Steve had grown used to living on the island, helping Diana fight off the Kraken that seemed to have grown fond of him. But he still longed to return to his world. Do you miss it terribly? Tell me about your home, Diana requested one night as they sat by the fire. Steve smiled, and a faraway look could be seen in his eyes as she watched him. He told her that Gateway City was on the coast, and when the sun would hit the ocean, it would seem to dance before your eyes. That night, as Circe cooked their dinner, Diana began to study. Eventually, she closed her book and stood. "Steve, would you mind grabbing some firewood from the pile by the door?" Diana called as she crossed the room to her mother. Once they were alone, Diana whispered her plan to Circe. "I found it, Mother. The way to send Steve home. This spell," Diana whispered as she showed Circe the book. But Circe points out that the spell requires a worthy sacrifice, not a small one. "I understand it perfectly," Diana tells her before Steve returns. That night, Circe awakens to find her daughter sitting before the fire, whispering quietly. "Diana? What are you doing up at this hour?" Circe whispers as she crosses the room. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. About what I am," Diana tells her. She glances up. "If I am a great warrior, and will someday be an even greater one, a savior of humanity, as you say, then I cannot fail in my first mission for humanity," Diana tells her. But Circe doesn't understand. Diana motions to Steve, who is asleep nearby. "One good man is all it takes to save the world. He wasn't a gift, Mother. He was a test," Diana tells her. Circe shakes her head and reaches for her daughter. "We don't know that," she whispers. But Diana pulls aside her cloak, revealing her severed arm laying before the fire. "If we are right that I am a great warrior, then the dominant arm of a great warrior is a worthy sacrifice," Diana tells her mother, who gasps and kneels by her daughter's side. "Diana, what have you done?" she cried. The next morning, Steve finds the women on the beach, standing before a roaring green fire as they cast their spells. He is shocked to find Diana is missing her arm, but before he can question the events, the spell takes effect and Steve begins to disappear. "Diana!" he calls. But the island is gone, and once again, Steve finds himself on the beach of Gateway City, shocked and confused. The spell was cast and Steve was gone. Diana looked sadly at where he once stood. "I'm sorry you didn't get to say goodbye," Circe tells her daughter, but Diana shakes her head. "I will see him again," she says softly. In the present, the tentacle tightens on Diana's arm, but she whispers a spell and the arm suddenly disappears with a crackle of magic. Diana falls through the air, but begins to fly again and returns to the command center. Are you okay? Your arm! It took your arm! One of the officers says as he rises to her side, but Diana shakes her head, angry that the soldiers have not retreated yet. I'm fine. I lost my arm long ago. In its place is a magic arm my mother and I made. I can get it back, but it will take complicated magic. Diana says. She looks around, questioning the soldiers if she was unclear about them retreating. You need to leave now, she says to the officers as she clicks on a prosthetic arm. She turns to find Steve standing before her, a hand reaching out for her missing arm. This is how you got me out. You gave them a hero's arm, he says softly. Diana smiles and places a hand against his cheek. I believe I called it a warrior's arm, but it was more than worth it, she tells him. Steve looks up, explaining that he doesn't want to abandon her to this monster. I know, it's why you were worth saving, but you need to listen to me and go, she whispers. Diana heads back outside, hoping to buy the evacuation more time. But as she steps outside, she stumbles into Dr. Barbara Minerva. Miss, you shouldn't be here, Diana tells the excited woman. Barbara stares at her in awe, and Diana turns to leave. Wonder Woman! Barbara suddenly shouts. Diana turns back to her in surprise. The Amazons! It's what they would call their champion. You are one, right? An Amazon? Barbara says, her words rushed out. Diana stands before her. You know about the Amazons? She asks. Barbara nods, explaining that she has studied the myth of Amazons her whole life. She even wrote her dissertation on it. But suddenly, the screech of the Tetracide echoes through the city. I must go. We will speak on this more, Diana says before leaping into the air and flying away. She stands on the beach once more, staring at the Tetracide as it grows ever closer. But Diana finally has a plan. Something that might save the people of Gateway City. Diana gathers a news reporter and his cameraman, bringing them to the highest building in the city to work her magic. She looks up at them as she begins to trace a magic sigil. This is not for recording, gentlemen, Diana tells them, explaining that magic is very powerful and sacred, and someone must earn the responsibility to wield it. She begins to cast her spell, and finally looks at the reporters to begin broadcasting. Once the camera is rolling, Diana begins to speak to the people of Gateway City, warning them of the horror that is coming, but asking them not to be afraid. My name is Diana, and I'm afraid that I need your help to save your city. This will be difficult to hear, to understand, but to save you from the fate of the Tetracide, I'm going to briefly make the entire city deaf, she tells them. She knows that the people will be afraid, but they need to remain calm and help those around them while she battles this great evil. I came here to save your city, but today it will be up to each of you to save your city instead. I know you can do it. Wonder Woman believes in you, she tells Gateway City. She reaches for a magic vial in her pouch and smashes it in the center of her sigil. A powerful magic explodes outwards, and a green mist begins to blanket across the city as Diana's plan begins to take effect. Gateway City now. Etta and Gia Candy watch the news of the attack on the TV. They watch as Diana stands before the camera, asking that everyone help their neighbors as the spell of deafness falls over the city. Etta holds up a sign for her sister, explaining that she is going out to help. She reaches for the door to their shop and opens it, but both sisters are shocked to find Diana and Steve Trevor standing before them. Hey Etta, can we come in? Steve asks. But Gia suddenly begins to freak out. Oh God, I can hear you! Am I going to hear the death sound? Gia shouts as she quickly covers her ears in a panic. But Diana smiles and motions for her to remain calm. You're okay. I've done a protective spell around this building so that we can communicate safely. Steve introduces Diana to the pair, explaining that she and her mother were the ones who protected him while on the Wild Isle in Hell. Etta and Gia stare at the Amazon in shock. This is a lot to process, but I'm guessing there's no time for that. Why are you here? Etta asks. Steve nods and smiles, explaining that Diana needed help of the witches. Stepping forward, Diana puts an arm around Gia and motions to her shop. Fear not, Gia. I come seeking only ingredients, no more. I had to use the last of some things for the spell to deafen the city, Diana tells her. She flexes the prosthetic that has replaced her magical right arm, explaining that while the arm was forged in fire by Hephaestus himself and is a powerful weapon, she will need her magical second arm to defeat the Tetracide. Gia nods at the warrior. Arms are good to have, she says softly. Diana begins to list off the ingredients that she requires, and Gia moves quickly around the shop, gathering the most rare items from a safe. Diana smiles at her. Gia, thank you. You are quite the witch, she says as the final items are laid on the counter. Diana looks around the room, questioning whether the girls have somewhere else that she can cast the spell, because there will be quite a lot of blood, Diana notes. A short time later, Diana is in the back room of the shop. Her upper body was covered in the blood that Steve, Gia, and Etta donated. The trio watch wide-eyed as Diana begins to mutter her spell inside a circle of power. Blood-red light begins to fill the room, and energy suddenly slams into Diana's chest. Long ago, on the Wild Isle in Hell, Circe rushed outside from her cave home. She falls to her knees and tries to catch her breath. So the visions have started then, a voice calls to her. Circe looks up, but keeps her eyes shut tight. You did this? She demands. There's a long pause. Yes, my most devoted disciple, the voice finally answers. Circe asks why. Why would the voice do this to her? Why would she allow her devoted disciple to be imprisoned on this island and bring her a child that wasn't her own? There is a great and powerful game afoot, Circe. A new path has been set, the voice says, explaining that she foresaw that Circe would love and care for the child, and that the child's love would in turn change Circe. I could see that only one such as you could raise the hero that we would need. I see that you will, in time, defy even me to protect her, the voice says. Suddenly, a light fills the sky that Circe can see even through her tightly shut eyes. You may look upon me, Circe, most beloved of all my beloved. Look upon Hecate and know you are blessed and will be remembered. The goddess calls. Circe opens her eyes and looks upon the goddess of magic and witchcraft. Shortly, she returns to the cave, where Diana is asleep on her bed. Circe looks at her daughter, remembering the visions of the future that she saw in her dreams, of the hero that Diana would become. Diana suddenly opens her eyes and reaches for Circe. I had a bad dream, Diana whispers as Circe lays next to her, whispering that she too had a bad dream. Diana yawns and pulls tight against her mother, asking what her dream was about. Circe takes a moment, staring up at the rocky ceiling of their cave dwelling. The future, she finally whispers softly in the darkness. The door to the stockroom opens and Diana steps out, her magical arm returned and glowing. Thank you, my friends. My strength has fully returned. I owe you a debt, and it will not be forgotten, Diana says as she moves to wash the dried blood from her body. She moves towards the door, preparing to head back out to battle the Tetracide. But she is shocked as she looks at the pier, as smoke and fire show the creature's path into the city. By Hecate, no, Diana whispers. She leaps into the air, flying back into the city. She hovers close to the massive monster, trying to think of some way to stop its advance. The people of Gateway City can't hear the death sound, so they are not coming to the monster. Instead, it has gone looking for them. Every step shakes the earth, and buildings quake and crumble at its passing. Suddenly, an idea springs into mind, and Diana flies back out of the city. She returns to the ocean and hovers over the place where her sword disappeared beneath the waves. She begins to cast another spell, and the ocean begins to bubble. Finally, the blade breaks free of the waters and returns to her hands. "Hello, my friend. I've had a very big idea for you. You're going to love it," Diana says with a smile. She reaches into her bag and pulls out a potion bottle. Another quick spell, and the red liquid inside begins to bubble. Diana throws the potion onto the beach, and the air is suddenly filled with the screeches and cries of humanity. Horror and fear echo throughout the beach. Inside the city, the tetracide suddenly turns. It begins to move back towards the beach, drawn to the sounds of anguish that it yearns for. Waiting at the pier, Diana has begun to cast another spell, this time on her sword. It begins to glow green, and as the spell finishes, it grows even larger. Yet Diana still wields it as if it were as light as a feather. She leaps into the sky, holding a sword so massive that it could stand against the likes of the tetracide. Yet the monster does not seem to notice as it continues towards the cries of anguish. Diana hovers over the great monster, ready to strike with her blade. Finally, she shouts an order to Pegasus, who blasts the tetracide with hellfire. The monster looks up and opens its mouth in a roar. Diana responds with her own battle cry and charges downward. The sword is pointed at the monster's mouth, and there is a sickening sound as the metal pierces the great monster, cutting it in two. The monster trembles for a moment before falling to the side, defeated. Victorious, Diana walks away, with news cameras capturing the entire ordeal. Meanwhile, in the Oval Office, the president is watching the event unfold. He looks at a nearby woman. "Kale, you're the National Security Advisor. Advise already," he demands. The blonde woman turns to him. "Mr. President, even if she killed that thing, I'd say we still have a very big problem on our hands." Diana stands on the beach, glaring up at the tetracide as its body slides apart, cleaved in two by her mighty greatsword. But Diana knows the truth. While the monster is severely wounded, it is not yet dead. Her sword tumbles through the air, shrinking as she catches it. Suddenly, there is a sound of approaching fighter jets. Diana looks up as the US military opens fire on the tetracide with missiles. The powerful weapons fly through the air, but the tetracide lets out a bellowing roar and swats away the three missiles. Diana watches in horror as the missiles turn back towards the city. "Hera, no!" she whispers. She leaps into the air and quickly gives chase, whispering words of magic and tossing a spell to stop the weapons. "Hecate, please, aid your servant in her hour of need," Diana whispers as she throws the spells. Two of the missiles are grabbed and turned away from the city, but the third missile manages to continue forward. It grows closer to striking one of the buildings, but suddenly, Pegasus is there, opening his bony jaws and breathing a burst of hellfire that destroys the weapon. "Thank you, Pegasus," Diana whispers. She glances up to see the fighter planes turning around for another pass. "Can't be having any more of that," she says to herself. Shortly, the fighter pilot glances up from his instruments. His eyes widen as he sees the female warrior flying alongside him. "Hi, so I need you to not do that again. All right?" Diana requests. He stares at her for a moment, dumbfounded, but finally nods. Yes, ma'am," the pilot says with a nod. Diana nods back and flies off. Finally, she is floating over the mighty tetracide, which is already slowly healing, pulling and knitting its bisected body back together. Diana stares at it. She has only been buying time up to this point, but now, she needs to end this fight. She reaches down to her belt and begins to unravel her glowing lasso. Her mind fills with memories as she thinks back to her time on the Wild Isle in Hell. Cersei had handed her daughter the lasso as they sat around the fire. It's a last resort, Diana, but you will need that more than once where you're headed, Cersei had warned. Diana smiles sadly at her mother and sighs. Would it trouble us so to talk about some of my future in a positive light, Mother? Diana asks. Cersei looks up at her daughter and nods. Diana, I'm very sorry if I've given you the impression your future is negative, because it's not. It's glorious, filled with beauty and horror, danger and opportunity, which is why you will need this, Cersei says. She wraps the lasso around Diana's hand, explaining that it will hold anything and that it has the power to transform anything. I have named her Thesia. It means sacrifice, Cersei tells her. Diana stares down at the glowing lasso in her hands and nods. Her quest has begun, and she leaves Cersei by the fire. A short time later, Diana returns. Her body is cut and torn, blood seeping from several small wounds. You didn't have to wait up, Diana gasps as she collapses by the fire. Speak plainly, Diana, Cersei whispers as she looks up to her daughter. Diana looks up, memories of her battle with the Harpy filling her mind. They fought into a cave, with Diana losing her battle axe. She had no choice but to use the lasso to strangle the monster, watching as the light faded from her eyes. I found it a bit cruel, Diana finally whispers. Cersei stares at her for a moment, anger flashing in her eyes as she stands. Diana, not everything you meet will decide to be your best friend. Many will try to kill you even before shoving away your hand of friendship. Thesia is made exactly for that, Cersei says before turning away and walking back to their home. Diana sighs as she watches her mother leave. She tends the fire, slowly putting it out. She either cannot see the cruelty in it, or she does not care, Diana whispers. But suddenly, there is a light within the smoke as the fire goes out. Diana looks up as her goddess Hecate floats before her. You're right, Hecate tells her. Hecate leans down to her chosen warrior, explaining that Cersei made her daughter a cruel weapon, but would only do so because she knows that Diana would need it. Diana bows her head. This weapon, perhaps we do not see things the same way, Diana says softly. But Hecate shakes her head. This lasso is your mother, girl. She made it with love and pain, fire and blood. It's a lasso of transmogrification because transformation is what she knows best. And for you, she demands only the best, Hecate whispers before disappearing in the smoke as it dissipates. Shortly, Diana returns to her cave and finds her mother, asking for her forgiveness. There's nothing to forgive, Cersei says softly, not looking up from her tea. But Diana kneels before her mother. Thesia is not a weapon I would have made for myself, but I see that is a good thing. As for myself, my vision is narrow. I will always benefit from my mother's eyes. I was wrong to doubt you, Diana whispered. Now, she floats over the tetracide, staring at the monster as it continues to heal. She lowers to the beach and looks down at the lasso in her hands, looking at Thesia that her mother had created, and a plan begins to form in her mind. Of course, it was in front of me all the time. I am become her, she who is both terrible and tragic, cursing and cursed, forever entwined in injustice, a living hell. This mantle must I accept today, for a far greater good, in hope and faith that I will once again someday become Diana of the Wild Isle, Diana, last of the Amazons, Diana, daughter of Cersei. Mother, please do not forget me. For now, Diana whispers as she begins to wrap the lasso around her arm, remembering her mother's words, her teachings. Diana's body begins to transform, growing in size as her skin becomes thick and scaly. Now, I am doomed. I am Medusa, and none that see my face shall live. She roars as she raises up as the half-snake creature, her hair twisting and hissing. Back at the magic shop, Steve, Minerva, and the sisters watch the transformation on the news. What happened to her? Steve whispers in horror. She's Medusa, Dr. Minerva says, as she explains the story of Medusa to the three. Back on the beach, Medusa slides forward, hissing as the tetracide roars at her. She stares at it, and the tetracide stares back with its many small eyes. Those eyes regard Medusa, and the curse suddenly takes effect. The tetracide stops moving, its body transforming into stone, stopping forever. But Medusa isn't done. She turns back towards the city, sliding forward, searching for more prey. It's dead. Why is she still Medusa? Minerva asks as she watches her laptop. Maybe it's not that simple? If you become something else, how do you remember what you were? Edda asks. Steve ponders this for a moment before nodding. He tears the sleeve from his shirt, making a blindfold. Your friends remind you, he says as he heads for the door, not allowing the sisters to stop him. Meanwhile, Medusa is moving through the streets, her tail lashing out and smashing buildings as she slides forward. But a voice calls out to her. Diana? Steve says, moving forward, his eyes covered. Diana, I know you can hear me, and I know you understand that this is not who you are. You must remember, you are Diana, Witch of the Wild Isle, daughter of Circe, the last of the Amazons, Wonder Woman, hero of Gateway City, Steve calls. Medusa holds her hands to her ears as the scales begin to fall away. The snake body begins to shrink, and once again, Diana stands before him. One good man can save the world, Steve. Thank you, Diana whispers to him. But the battle isn't complete just yet. Thanking Steve once more, Diana flies back to the beach and punches the now stoned tetracide hard enough to crack the stone and shatter it, making sure the beast is destroyed. She returns to the beach to find her new friends waiting for her. What now? They all ask. But Diana smiles at them. Oh, there's so much to be done. I'm not going anywhere, she begins to explain. But suddenly, a hole opens up in the sand behind them, and a massive glowing hand reaches up, grabbing Diana and pulling her into the hole, leaving her friends stunned on the beach and staring after her. What the f***? Edda finally shouts after a long pause. And there you have it, the last Amazon arc from Absolute Wonder Woman. Personally, I had a blast reading this and think Kelly did a great job on it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And check out the main Comicstorian channel if you want to follow these stories as they come out. I'm Dan with Comicstorian, and we will see you next time. Rest in peace, Benny.